Xers and honorary Xers, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dee, and as always, this is my BFF and feline life mate Stud. Today's story is about one of the deadliest road incidents in recent U.S. history, the 2018 Schoharie limousine crash. This is a tragic tale that touches on so many elements: a seemingly innocent celebration, lax regulations, and a 110% preventable disaster that cost 20 people their lives. Let's dive in and break down what happened, why, and the devastating impact that it left behind. Oh, and disclaimer, there will be some graphic accident scene photos. No blood and guts, of course, but if you're even the least bit squeamish, please proceed with caution. So let's start with a little background. Our story centers around a company called Prestige Limousine, which also did business under the names Hassie Limousine and Saratoga Luxury Limousines. This limo service was based in Saratoga County, New York, and owned by a Pakistani immigrant named Shahed Hussein and operated by his son Nauman Hussein. I'd like to tell you that I might be mispronouncing their names, but I really don't give a shit. The company was run out of a dilapidated motel Shahed owned called the Creston Suites and Cottages in Wilton, New York. Shahed Hussein had a particularly sketchy past, from murder in Pakistan to illegally entering the U.S. to being a paid government informant in the investigation of domestic terrorist threats after the September 11th attacks, and more. If I tried to go into detail, this video would never end. If you want to know more, I'll leave a link below to a great article from New York Magazine that really gets into it. Just know that it's been suspected his involvement with the U.S. government got him off the hook for a lot of shit. Allegedly, of course. Anyway, much like Shahed, the particular limo involved in the crash, a modified 2001 Ford Excursion XLT, had a pretty shady past too. Originally, this vehicle wasn't even a limo. It was a regular schmegular SUV that had been converted into a 30-foot stretch limousine, 15 feet longer than its original frame. And here's where things start to get sketchy. Now, a standard unmodified 2001 Ford Excursion XLT has a V10 6.8-liter engine, it seats 9, and it weighs between 6,650 to 7,190 pounds. According to Kelley Blue Book, this vehicle has a 4.8 out of 5-star rating based on 538 reviews. Not too shabby. However, the modified Excursion, with its Franken body, weighed more than 10,000 pounds and should have been registered with the DMV and the DOT as a bus, making it subjected to more thorough and more frequent inspections. The vehicle was certified for 10 seats, just one more than the original SUV. However, the modified vehicle had 18 installed. These additional seats were not welded or sufficiently bolted to the floor. Moreover, while seat belts were not required by law, they were installed. However, they were inaccessible. This vehicle had failed multiple inspections and was not safe to be on the road with one passenger, let alone 18. In fact, the New York State Department of Transportation had found over 22 safety violations, including deficient brakes, just a month before the crash. It had also failed 2 inspections on account of mechanical problems and a defective emergency exit. Most importantly, with all of these issues, the vehicle was placed out of service by the DOT, but it didn't stop Hussein from putting it back into service on that fateful day in October 2018. October 6, 2018 was supposed to be a day of celebration. A group of 17 friends and family members, including 4 sisters and 2 sets of newlyweds, were celebrating Amy Steenberg's 30th birthday. Amy and her husband Axel had planned an afternoon at Brewery Omegang in Cooperstown, 40 miles away. Now, this limo wasn't their first choice, nor was it even really their second. The party bus they had originally reserved had broken down. I can't confirm if the original reservation was with Prestige or not, but regardless, Hussein sent this piece of junk to pick the group up at the Steenbergs' home. At the wheel was 53-year-old CDL certified driver Scott Lisanikia, who, according to his wife Kim, had been working part-time with Prestige for a little over a year. Lisanikia held a commercial driver's license, but not a passenger endorsement, which is required to drive 15 or more adult passengers in New York State. I don't really want to talk too much trash about the driver, since in my opinion the cause of this accident wasn't really his fault. But according to a 2020 Times-Union newspaper article, Lisanikia's license had been suspended just 1 month prior to the crash. He had ignored a March 2018 traffic ticket for driving an uninspected vehicle and failed to pay the fine for his subsequent conviction. He was also ticketed in May 2018 for driving an unregistered vehicle, and 3 years earlier, in 2015, he was ticketed for failure to yield at an intersection, causing an accident which involved a vehicle rollover. On September 7, 2018, just 1 month before the fatal accident in Schoharie, Lisanikia paid his fine for the May ticket, and his license was promptly reinstated. Anyway, back to October 6th. Shortly after picking up the group of doomed revelers, the limo began to experience serious mechanical issues. One partygoer texted a friend, "The limo sounds like it's going to explode." Yes, haha, it's a junker literally. The motor is making everyone deaf. Witnesses reported seeing it parked alongside New York State Route 30 with its backup lights and beepers on, yet still creeping forward. Those witnesses saw Lisanikia inside the vehicle looking confused, lost, or frazzled. Just an estimated 2 minutes later, witnesses spotted the vehicle in the midst of its impending doom, speeding down a hill on Route 30 in Schoharie, where the brakes ultimately seemed to fail. It's been reported that Lisanikia was pumping the useless brake pedal so hard it deformed into the shape of his loafer. Without the apparent ability to slow or stop, the limousine accelerated to over 100 miles an hour, running through a stop sign at a T intersection at the bottom of the hill. It crashed into a 2015 Toyota Highlander that was parked in the parking lot of a store called the Apple Barrel, launching the 4,000-pound SUV 80 feet. The excursion ultimately collided with an embankment and several trees, where it finally came to rest. Tragically, all 17 passengers, the driver, and 2 pedestrians trying to flee from the store's parking lot lost their lives. All aboard the vehicle died of blunt force trauma.
And we heard an explosion, which I know now was the car crash, and these trees just all swayed.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families following this horrific tragedy.
20 people are dead after a limousine crash in upstate New York. CBS's Tony DeCoppel reports from the scene.
20 people are dead in upstate New York after a crash involving an apparently out-of-control stretch limousine.
A 2001 Ford Excursion limousine was traveling southwest on State Route 30 and failed to stop at the intersection. The limousine traveled across the intersection into a parking lot and struck a 2015 Toyota Highlander that was unoccupied and parked.
It happened Saturday afternoon in Schoharie, a town at the edge of the Catskill Mountains, about 170 miles north of New York City.
Everyone inside the limousine was killed. 2 pedestrians standing nearby were also struck and killed.
A relative told CBS News that the victims in the limo had been on a wine tour of the local vineyards. Amy Dunlop Johnson says 3 members of her family died in the crash.
20 fatalities is just horrific. I've been on the board for 12 years, and this is one of the biggest loss of lives that we've seen in a long, long time.
A woman who lives nearby says she heard the crash and immediately knew it was bad.
I heard this loud bang. I came out, and then I heard screaming. I walked up, and I could see this large van, very unusual looking vehicle for out here in Schoharie, in the bushes and really wrecked.
The tragedy is being investigated by both the National Transportation Safety Board and New York State Police. Neither agency has speculated as to a possible cause. Tony DeCoppel, CBS News, Schoharie, New York.
After the crash, investigators, including the New York State Police and the NTSB, looked into Prestige Limousine's practices, and the results were jaw-dropping, to say the least. As I stated, not only had this particular limo failed inspections, but it had been ordered off the road. Investigators also learned that Prestige Limousine had a history of violating regulations, including using vehicles that hadn't met state safety standards. This raised massive questions about how such a business was allowed to keep operating, and why there hadn't been more enforcement. Other limousine businesses in the area were scratching their heads. If more than 20% of an operator's vehicles have been declared unserviceable, the state can force it to cease operations, an order only a court can override. Records showed that Prestige had 80% of its vehicles unserviceable at the time of the crash. So how did Prestige skirt around this? Records show that while the New York Department of Transit did regularly inspect vehicles, it did a shit job of following up on ensuring necessary repairs and maintenance were performed. In fact, a 2017 federal audit found that the New York DOT verified repairs on only 1% of the vehicles it inspected. 1%. Imagine if you only did 1% of your job. Anyway, with that said, in October 2018, roughly a year before the crash, the DOT held a hearing to look into how poorly Prestige was maintaining its vehicles. Nobody from Prestige bothered to show up, which meant they could have been hit with a fine of up to $5,000 by default. Susan Mallory, the Schoharie County District Attorney, pointed out that Nauman Hussein had registered the Excursion improperly as a livery vehicle. Remember, it should have been registered as a bus. This sneaky move let him get it inspected under the DMV's less strict rules instead of the DOT's tougher standards, which Mallory says shows criminal intent. To top it off, Prestige insurance company Global Liberty canceled the coverage on the Excursion a whopping 6 times in the first half of 2018 alone. Each time that happened, the DMV automatically pulled the vehicle's registration. The only way to get it back was for the owner to reinsure the limo. Otherwise, the plates would have to be turned in. The Excursion's registration was reinstated for the 6th time just 1 day before the crash. We don't know why Global Liberty kept canceling, though. They wouldn't comment on it. Shahed Hussein, the true owner of the business, did what any piece of shit business owner facing a crisis would do. He fled the country for Pakistan for quote-unquote health reasons. In 2019, it was reported that he was living in Dubai, a country with no extradition treaty to the U.S. Regardless, his son Nauman took the fall for the entire operation, since he was the one who put the ill-fated vehicle back in service in the first place. So, what specifically caused this accident to happen? Well, long story short, the brakes simply failed. Prestige's aftermarket modified Excursion weighed close to 10,000 pounds without passengers, way too much to ask of the original brakes and tires meant for the original unmodified SUV. Reports came out saying the Excursion had been flagged multiple times for weak brakes, and by weak, I mean less than 80% of their original stopping power. When a vehicle's stretched into a limo, the front brake lines usually stay the same, but the back lines, they need to be extended. These extensions are typically made of steel to prevent blockage or squeezing. However, with an original towing capacity of 11,000 pounds, the Excursion should have been able to stop safely at the intersection if the original braking system had been in good shape. Of course, there's the issue of seatbelts, or lack thereof. As I mentioned earlier, New York State does not require backseat passengers to wear seatbelts, so there was no reason for them to be included in the expansion of the SUV, nor were airbags necessary. That being said, the seats that were added to the modified vehicle did have lap belts, but they were under the seats and mostly inaccessible. It's highly unlikely any of the passengers were wearing a seatbelt at the time of the crash. Would anyone survive if they had been wearing one? It's hard to say. The out-of-control vehicle was reportedly topping speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour before crashing into the Highlander in the parking lot and careening off into the embankment. In the aftermath, Nauman Hussein, the operator of Prestige Limousine, was arrested and charged with criminally negligent homicide. The families of the victims pushed for justice, arguing that the crash was entirely preventable if Hussein had simply followed the rules, and the NTSB agreed in its September 2020 comprehensive report detailing its findings. They attributed the probable cause of the crash to Prestige's egregious disregard for safety in operating the limousine for a passenger charter despite known mechanical defects. This trial brought up some intense emotions and high-stakes debates about liability and safety regulations in the limo industry. Nauman Hussein was anything but sympathetic. Despite removing the out-of-service sticker himself, which was later found crumbled in a ball on the floor of his own personal vehicle, he blamed Mavis Tire for the crash, who had billed Premier Limousine for mechanical brake work that was never performed. Like, dude, does it matter? The DOT found the vehicle unserviceable. Why the fuck are you even putting it on the road? Ugh, this clown. Anyway, upon his arraignment, the DA asked the court to revoke Hussein's passport. He had been found with a vehicle full of personal belongings and suitcases. She considered him a flight risk and was worried he'd take off to Dubai with dear old dad. Oh, and fun fact, this wasn't Hussein's first run-in with the law. Back in 2014, during a traffic stop in Cohoes, he and his brother Schoharie, who was driving with a revoked license, allegedly tried to pretend to beat each other. Nauman ended up being charged with false impersonation and conspiracy, both misdemeanors. It's unclear what happened with those charges, but I'm betting Dad's FBI involvement got them off the hook. Oh, and another fun fact, according to the Times Union newspaper, Nauman and his father both sought help from FBI agents with respect to the fatal crash, but no help was offered or provided. Not sure if they thought the FBI could make the death of 20 people go away or what, but nice try, I guess? This case moved forward at a snail's pace. Between the defense not receiving the vehicle in a timely fashion, to bail reform laws mucking up proceedings, the COVID-19 shutdown, and a far too lenient plea deal struck down by the court, the trial finally moved forward on Monday, May 8th, 2023. The jury consisted of 9 women and 3 men with 4 alternates. On May 17, 2023, after 2 days of jury deliberations, Nauman Hussein was convicted on all 20 counts and remanded to the custody of the Schoharie County Sheriff's Department. On May 31, 2023, he was sentenced to the maximum of 5 to 15 years in prison and is serving his sentence at Attica State Prison near Buffalo, New York. He isn't eligible for parole until May 2028. Needless to say, the families of the victims filed civil suits against Prestige Limousine and Mavis Discount Tire, as well as the New York DOT and DMV for denial of records in a state's Freedom of Information law request. One of the victims' families who filed suit against Mavis alleged that just 2 years before the crash, a Mavis mechanic put a vice grip on the bent left rear brake line following a rotor replacement, leaving the vehicle almost entirely reliant on its front brakes. They also alleged that in May 2018, the store put a valid inspection sticker on the Excursion without performing the inspection. Mavis denied responsibility and said it will ask to be removed as a defendant from all further suits filed against it. Premier's insurance company was also sued, paying out its max of $500,000 split between 20 families. And that's before any legal fees that the insurance company's lawyer wanted paid. An attorney unrelated to the case recommended that any victims who held motor vehicle insurance policies of their own file claims against their policies, since New York requires all motorists to have supplemental uninsured motorist coverage as part of their auto insurance policies. In July 2022, at the end of the year's legislative session, lawmakers passed the Grieving Families Act. This bill was created in response to the limitations families faced in the Schoharie crash cases, as well as other recent tragedies. It would allow families in wrongful death cases to seek damages for emotional suffering and expand who in the family can file these suits. Insurance companies, along with some medical and business groups, strongly opposed it. By December 2023, Governor Kathy Hochul, who took over after Governor Andrew Cuomo's resignation, and a story for another time, vetoed the law for a second time. Hochul said it introduced significant unintended consequences and it would most likely lead to more expensive insurance premiums. As of June 2024, it's been amended once again, but as of late 2024, this revised version has not yet been enacted, and efforts to pass it remain ongoing, with some advocates pushing for legislative action to finally make it law. And if you don't think insurance companies run this country, you might want to think again. This story is so heartbreaking. Imagine you're getting all dressed up, ready for a night out on the town to celebrate your birthday or your friend's birthday, and what you're really doing is getting ready for your own demise. What should have been a good time filled with laughs and memories turned catastrophic. What happened here, it wasn't just an accident. It was the result of carelessness and neglect. And 20 people paid the ultimate price. The Reflections Memorial is located at the site of the crash in Schoharie, New York, next to the Apple Barrel Country Store. It was created by the Apple Barrel's owners to provide a place for healing and remembrance. There's a stone for each victim, except for Scott Lissanikia, whose footprints were not included at the time due to pending investigation and court cases. There's also a blank stone with a lotus flower to represent everyone affected by the tragedy. Geez, if he hasn't gotten a stone yet, I sure hope Scott Lissanikia gets one soon. Many thanks and major props to Larry Rulison from the Times-Union. He has been on this case since day one, and without his investigating and reporting, this video wouldn't be possible. Seriously. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to see more true crime stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and remember, please stay safe out there.